Hey everybody, what's going on out there? It's Ryan Kidd, and I'm the Human B-side. Welcome back to the program. Today, my guest has so many great writing credits. She's penned numerous books about many of our rock and roll heroes, including Peter Parrott of The Only Ones, the New York Dolls, Brett Smiley. That book was called The Prettiest Star, and I absolutely adore Brett Smiley. That book was terrific. But the book that will be the topic of our conversation today is Johnny Thunders In Cold Blood. Ladies and gentlemen, the woman Johnny Thunders was quoted as saying, "The smartest chick I ever met." Here she is, author Nina Antonia. Nina, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
And of course, Johnny said that because I had to be smart to be writing about him.
Totally. Absolutely. That's a hell of a quote to have him say about you, too. That's awesome. But thank you so much for joining us. It's a real treat. I'm a huge Johnny Thunders fan. I'm a huge fan of your books, and a lot of my audience is as well. So this is a real treat for us.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, you've had a great career. I've enjoyed a lot of your books, but today we're going to focus on In Cold Blood, which was recently revised and updated. So where better to start than the beginning? So what prompted you to want to write this book?
Oh, do you know what? I was so young and naive, and well, being a huge Johnny fan prompted me, but also going into town. I was living in Manchester at the time and looking at the rock biogs. There weren't as many then as there are now, but Iggy Pop's I Need More had just come out. And I thought, I'd love to read a book about Johnny Thunders.
That's awesome. So you took the initiative and did it. How old were you when you wrote the book?
Gosh, I probably started thinking about it when I was 22, 23.
Wow, that's amazing. That's incredible. Um, so the book for people who haven't read it yet, it's filled with great insight. There's fascinating interviews from like an array of colorful characters that made up that whole rock and roll scene. But in your research and interviews, what person did you find most fun to talk to? And maybe on the contrary, were there any that maybe have been a little more difficult?
Ah, do you know what? Steve was lovely to talk to, even though it was a short interview.
Yeah.
Um, and Johnny's later on German manager, he gave me a lot of wisdom.
You
I
know,
just, do you know what? I was spoilt for great characters, so it's a really difficult question.
actually, about that manager, I have a question later on about him because he's a fascinating character, and somebody you really don't hear about too often, but in the book you do. So we'll get back to him later on.
Well,
But
he's very well, and he's living in Kathmandu where he makes pashminas and has a polo club.
oh wow, okay,
So,
that's cool. Um,
yeah,
so Stiv was when did you get to speak to Stiv? When did you talk to him?
I did the interview because Johnny was recording demos and he had Steve and Mike Monroe come down to do backing vocals.
Yeah, that's right. And was that the time where Stiv, Johnny, and Dee Dee Ramone were living together?
Oh, they weren't living together. That was later on.
Later
That was
on.
about three
Okay.
or 4 years later when um Steve got a record deal and he was living in Paris.
That's
Uh, Johnny used to call it the Rue de Rivoli, but I think it was the Rue de Rivoli.
oh, that's great.
Um, and I think Neil X was supposed to be producing it.
Okay, cool.
And but anyway, Steve thought it would be great to have Dee Dee and Johnny on it, but Dee Dee got really pissed off with Johnny. The big fight ensued. So know that these were more peaceful days in sleepy London town.
yeah, that was a an infamous punk rock story there, where I think what somebody wound up throwing bleach all over Johnny's clothes.
Oh, that was Dee Dee.
Yeah, Dee Dee did that. Uh-oh.
And wrecked Johnny's guitar. And
Oh, I could have.
anyway,
I can't imagine the calamity that ensued with all three of them living in the same house. Um, So, when you were doing the research, was there anyone that was a little more difficult? And I don't want to put you on the spot. I'll just,
Uh, no, I think everybody, because it seemed like such a novel idea,
yeah,
everybody kind of got involved. It was like, oh, well, what the hell? This is a surprise, etc., etc. But
yeah.
I think also probably one of the things that kind of swayed Johnny was that a book about Keith Richards had not long come out by Barbara Sharon.
Mhm.
So he probably thought, well, okay, a woman writing about me, that's cool if it's good enough for Keith, sort of thing.
It's good enough for me. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's very cool. Very cool. Another thing I loved about this book is the way that we kind of get to see a side of Johnny that's not often discussed, and that's the more human side of him. Because mostly when people talk about Johnny Thunders, they want to talk about the depravity and the excess and the drugs, but there was a lot more to him than that, than what we saw on the stage, right? So, I mean, in the time that you got to spend with Johnny, can you tell us a little bit about him as a person?
Um, well, I have to say first that the book has evolved. So the first version, the original version, is much punkier. But as I got to know Johnny and as I grew up and I maintained friendships with people like Jerry Nolan, so they were able to give me more information. So
Mhm.
the book became more fleshed out. But I mean, I realized from the first instant of meeting Johnny that he was a lot of attitude, but also he was really quite shy. He
Yeah.
was a real contradiction.
Yeah, and that's what I got from the book too. I mean, for as big of a personality that we see him as somebody on the stage, reading the book, he seems like a very shy guy who kind of is just trying to stay out of the way, in a lot of instances. But
He was very vulnerable and emotionally needy, but he could project the character of Johnny Thunders to become one of the greatest figures in rock and roll.
yeah, yeah, it's incredible. And I love that we get in the book a little more insight into him as a person and not just this, caricature of what people have made him. Um, but in
I
life
was
when
going
we're
to say, I used to be on Facebook and I used to belong to some of the Johnny Thunders pages, but I used to get so pissed off with people and their comments and
Mhm.
their assumptions that nobody loved Johnny, but they could have made his life better. But I had to leave because I just used to get really crazy.
Yeah, it's weird because I love the music and everything, but there is like a cult like kind of thing around it where there's just some weird stuff going on sometimes, and I really don't participate in a lot of those pages and stuff like that because it
No,
gives
I
me,
think it's a lot healthier not to.
yeah, it gives me the ick kind
Yeah.
of, but just to piggyback off that last question, um, when we're lucky enough to spend time with people that we find notable or inspiring in life, like you did with Johnny, we often take away something of importance or something learned. And like in all your time spent with Johnny, is there one thing maybe that you learned from him or you took from him that stuck with you through life?
I Writing that book was my apprenticeship. And even on my worst days, I try not to look a slob because Johnny always, even if he's just going down to the shots, somehow looked fantastic.
Right. That's awesome. I love that. He would love that answer too, I
Yeah.
think.
But he
I
did. He was
yeah.
incredibly chic.
Yeah. Uh, I found the book. I mean, I never spent time with him. You did. I didn't, but I found it just by reading it. It's a story of constant redemption, and I love it. I think it's great. I mean, talk about somebody who gets knocked down and just will not stay down. It's
I
unbelievable.
mean, I think he was deserving of redemption.
Absolutely.
Um, and I remember I've still got one of the cards that his sister made up for the funeral, and his she chose the Saint Jude, the patron saint of hopeless causes, which I thought was incredibly poignant.
Absolutely. Wow, that's pretty powerful. That's amazing.
Oh, I mean, I think Johnny was. I think I was lucky in a way that I had the foresight to see that he was an amazing character that was going to have this longevity. Thank God.
Yeah, and that's actually a question I have, and I want to get to that a little bit later.
Okay.
But I'm glad you mentioned it because I think that's something in the book too. It's the longevity and his totality is kind of this like ominous thing that's hanging over his head the entire book,
Mm,
and you can feel it in the writing. It's incredible. Um,
thank you.
yeah, and there are a lot of stories in this book that frankly border on the edge of madness. I mean, whether it be arrests or overdoses or the band being held hostage at gunpoint before a sound check. And by the way, I didn't know that the fingerprints on the back of the LAMF cover were from that incident, which was so cool to learn that in the book.
Oh,
And
I'm so glad
yeah,
I'm
it
able to
was
help you with that.
yeah, that was so cool. I didn't know that. And but I
I
don't want to give
think
too much away. I want to read the book, people. Read the book.
I was just going to say, I think what I had that was probably unusual for my age was an idea that time was going to move very quickly and that I kind of had to capture things.
Well, to have that foresight at that age is pretty incredible. I mean, when you were in the midst of writing this, I mean, obviously Johnny had been in the New York Dolls, which had some kind of prominence, whether it be the underground or not. But I mean, did you feel like you're like, wow, I'm in the middle of something that's like really happening? Like this has that longevity? Did you feel that way in the moment?
I just thought I'm meeting all these incredible people, but I didn't think about it too much because I was in it, if you know what I mean. But
Absolutely.
I do remember the Heartbreakers doing a series of gigs at the Marquee Club in London. And it was a very small, sweaty club, but it was packed to the rafters. And we were in this tiny backstage area, which wasn't much more than like a wooden hut. but but you could feel the people kind of pressing in on it
Yeah.
and the rising excitement. And I found it really unnerving, but at the same time, it was something about Johnny, and especially with the Heartbreakers, that really was so thrilling and so visceral
Yeah.
to be around.
Yeah, that's it. It sounds exhilarating. I mean, you feel because in the book too. I mean, there's so many writings about even just the shows, but even backstage, how it's just this tenseness. You can
Mm.
feel it, and it really just depended on what mood Jerry was in. It depended what mood Johnny was in, and it was just there's so many things going on, and it's enough to make your head spin as a reader. I can't imagine being like in the room with that. It just had to be incredible.
Well, they could cast moods that could like fill an auditorium if they wanted to,
Yeah,
just with
yeah.
a stir.
I could sense that for sure. Uh, so that story about the being held hostage at gunpoint in the sound check, that was one that stuck out for me, especially since I learned that those fingerprints on the back of LAMF were from there. That was probably one of my favorite stories in it. Uh, but was there a story from the book that you could share? You don't have to share too much because I want people to read it. But was there one that was like your favorite that stuck out to you?
I can't actually separate them.
Yeah.
I mean, I am just glad that I got them down to the record.
Yeah.
I get very frustrated when there are people who seem to will write about Johnny or comment about Johnny as if there's no background history out there, and there is now.
Yeah. Yeah. I
I
mean,
mean, my favorite was the Wikipedia page for Johnny. Did you ever see it at the beginning?
well, no, what does it say?
It said he was born in Florida.
Oh, you like that?
And I didn't have the technical skills to change it, but Phyllis Stein, who is Jerry Nolan's companion, she knew how to change it. So,
Oh man.
but where would you pull that from?
Well, people can write anything now. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, yeah,
And
that's
if you
true.
want the real story, man, you got to get In Cold Blood. It's the official biography. Nina Antonia, In Cold Blood, Johnny Thunders. And you just
And
go. Oh, go ahead. I'm
Go
sorry.
on. I was going to say Danny Garcia's film Looking for Johnny is has some great footage in as well.
Yeah, it does. I was actually just pulled the soundtrack out of that last week, and I listened to the soundtrack of that. It's terrific. I like that movie. I thought it was a pretty cool film about Johnny. There's some out there that I didn't care much for.
Yes,
That one I did. I like that one.
yes, yes. I think yes
Just
is
an
the way of
astounding
saying
yes
it.
on that one. Yeah, we don't have to go any further than that. It gives actually a really insightful look, I think, into the life of Jerry Nolan as well. I mean,
Well, he was incredibly important and just a unique character, and it was like something out of the 1950s, really.
absolutely. I mean, it seemed like Johnny and Jerry seemed to bring out like the best in each other, but also the worst. You know,
Yeah,
and
I
like,
think they'd agree with that too.
yeah. um, like, what can you tell me about the time you spent with Jerry? An incredible drummer and a pretty complex relationship with Johnny for sure.
I think Johnny was always in need of a father figure, and Jerry was one of those father figures. Um, and Johnny never played better than when he was playing. Had Jerry Nolan on stage with him. The pair of them just kind of were sparks of each other.
Jerry is just, you ever play that game with your friends? Like, oh, hey, you could start a band and you can have any drummer, any guitarist, and any bass player. If drummer, I would pick Jerry Nolan. The guy is just like a rock and roll machine. Just an absolutely incredible drummer. And I would agree with you. I don't think Johnny was ever better than when he was with Jerry.
Yeah, he really upped his game. There's one funny story I have about Jerry was that they were playing somewhere in London, and I had on this really cute pink jacket, and I was about size 10 then. And obviously Jerry was much taller and broader and wider than me. And he said, "Oh, I have to wear that jacket." So I gave him the jacket. I thought, he's never going to be able to fit into that. And yet somehow he did, and
He
he
did.
played drums in it. So
Unbelievable. That's great, man.
yeah.
He was just always, I felt like you said, he was like sometimes a father figure to Johnny. And, in another way, he's that one constant thing that's always solid in the band. I feel
Mm.
like, no matter what happened on stage, Jerry always had that backbeat. And he really never lost it. It's terrific. There's a part of the book where he's recalling the last time he spent with Johnny. That's as a reader, I found it kind of jarring, a little emotional, where he's leaving him. He's having a conversation and he leaves him where he found him on 14th and 3rd.
Yeah.
And it's very powerful. It's powerful stuff, considering the relationship they had. And then I started thinking it's kind of wild how many things in Johnny's life went full circle like that. And
I think there's also a lot of sort of poetry in there as well without trying.
yeah, I absolutely agree. How do yeah, I don't even know how to put it into words. Somehow you do. But that his life had its own way of writing these poetic verses, and the way it ended and the way things seem to come full circle in a lot of instances in his life is uncanny to me.
I think I like the lifestyle and everything and how I remember it is like Scorsese's Mean Streets.
Yes. That's a great comparison.
But it had that same kind of vibration to it. I
Yeah.
don't know how else to explain it, but it was poetic and it was cinematic and it was just like living in the most perfect good bad movie that
Yeah, yeah.
ever happened.
It really comes through, and the grit comes through in the book. The emotion comes through, and there are instances, like I said, in that one where Jerry's recalling the last time he's going to sadly ever speak to Johnny. It's a really powerful chapter in the book. Um,
But I mean, I'm saying I know. If I would read it, I'd have said I know. I just
uh,
yeah, I don't know
yeah.
what to say, but
Oh no,
I
no, it's
feel
just one of those
no, I was
things.
spoiled by meeting these incredible people at a very young age.
Yeah, yeah. It's like
Um,
another one of those things where you're looking back in hindsight at it, and then it's the feeling has got to be different than when you're living in the moment, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I still knew they were great people with great clothes.
They looked great.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Um, there's another theme in the book and throughout Johnny's life. It seems to be a constant tug of war with the press, the critics, and the like that would often villainize him. The book states in the beginning chapter of Alchemical Resolutions, what would the Heartbreakers make of being a must buy record on the wall of record store day or a download? That's the end of the quote there. If Johnny were still with us today, to see, how his legend has grown, how much more appreciation there is for him and his music dating back to the Dolls and onward. How do you think he'd feel about it now? What do you think he'd have to say about being a must-have record on the day of on the wall of record
He'd
store
probably
day?
say, I always knew I'd be bigger once I was dead. I mean, he says as much
Yeah,
in one of the later songs.
yeah,
It was like, I told you so.
yeah. I was gonna say he'd probably say like about time or something, you know.
It's a bit like the legend of Jesse James, it's kind of grown,
Yeah, it gets its own life, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
an intermittent legend. That's
yeah.
fine.
You had an interview with Patty Paladin that I found extremely interesting because she showed the strange dichotomy of Johnny's career, and that his lousy reputation is what made him kind of such a martyr in the rock and roll underground. But it's also what held him back from great success in the music industry. I mean, she was quoted as saying, his reputation, that's his main problem. His bad reputation, it keeps him in demand. It keeps him at the bottom. Ridiculous, eh? And that's the end of the quote. Uh, you described him in
But
the
I
book.
don't know. I don't know if that now that is necessarily true. I think it's a case of Johnny, Jerry, Billy, Walter, all the people around them, they weren't people that could be easily contained. They weren't establishment figures.
Yeah.
So they did it their way for good or ill, you know?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the way you described him at one point in the book, I like this quote a lot. A secret signature, a touchstone of authenticity, a reminder of the great American myth of the anti-hero, fallible yet beautiful. Um, did Johnny ever discuss maybe with you any disappointment of where his career was when you spent time with him, uh,
No, the
or
thing is that at the point that he began his kind of European renaissance, it was a
yeah,
very good time for him because he had the German manager, Christopher,
yeah,
and he had the Swedish girlfriend, Suzanne, who was really lovely.
yeah,
And because things had gotten very difficult for him in New York.
yeah.
I guess that would have been after gang war, kind of 1980. His wife had left him with the kids, and he really kind of sank down to the bottom.
Yeah.
But then Christopher came along and sort of dusted him down, and things started moving in Europe, and he was really loved in Europe and Japan as well.
Yeah, now that is, I think a renaissance is a perfect way to put it because, and that's where I find this arc of redemption, and it's constantly happening. It seems like in Johnny's life, that seemed like everything was really clicking when he went there, when he went to Europe, and it seemed like a really bright time in life for him, and that's where Christopher comes into play, and that's where I had that question about. We spoke about him a little bit earlier, but we can get into him. Uh, it's it's a character in the Thunder's world. I think that's not talked about as much, outside of this book. But is it what's his last name? It's Christopher. I can't pronounce it. Is it
I can't pronounce it either. It's
yeah, I don't know. We'll call
Gurky is what it looks
Garrick. Yeah,
like.
okay, we'll call him Christopher. So he's a strange character. Like I can't really quite pin down what I feel. I don't want to say not that I think he had bad intentions at all. I don't know what his intentions were because it seemed like
Hang on, because you're getting lost in not knowing. He viewed it as a challenge and a great art project.
okay, that's great because that's actually my question. I didn't, uh, it seemed like he took a chance on Johnny when it seemed like he didn't really have to. And I thought that was really cool. I mean, there were times the same way that Jerry felt like a father figure to Johnny, Christopher did as well sometimes in the book.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so.
Yeah.
He kind of attempted to father, Johnny. I think his frustration was that that Johnny was perhaps too damaged to take on the lessons that he was trying to teach him.
Yeah, and he kind of took him under his wing a little bit there. And
Very, very much so. I mean, he
yeah.
traveled all around Europe. He did everything, got him into some great gigs.
That's
And
great.
Johnny responded by being his brilliant self.
I think he really responded under the I don't want to say, I don't know how to say it, maybe leadership of Christopher. Like he really responded well to it. I mean, the shows were good. The reviews were getting better. And
Yeah.
yeah, I thought it was pretty cool. Definitely like an interesting character in the Thunder's world that I don't think gets talked about enough. So I appreciate you.
I
Uh,
don't think anybody particularly understands him. But he did see everything as a creative project, and it was no more than that. And let's go for the challenge because you're still a great rock and roller, Johnny. So he gave Johnny that extension of life.
yeah, that's amazing. And I'm so glad you can shed some light on that for me. Because like you said, I mean, don't think a lot of people understand him. I didn't. So it's really cool to hear about him in this, and especially in this point in Johnny's life.
I wish, have you seen the French film Mona et Moi?
No, no.
Because that's wonderful. And there's some beautiful footage of Johnny and Christopher in that. And it gives you a real sense of who they are.
Oh, that's very cool.
If any film should come out again on DVD or be streamed or whatever they do with things, it should be that film.
Yeah, I would love to see that. That'd be great. Before we did speak about, Johnny Thunders in totality. Was there ever a hint or a notion during life that maybe he thought he wouldn't realize his totality wouldn't be grasped until death? And that's got to be something that's very hard to live with.
Like I said before, he knew that he'd be bigger in death.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't imagine how hard that is to live with. I mean, but
But I think it was hard for Johnny to live with being Johnny Thunders.
yeah, no, I think you're right. Um, on this revised edition, you stated that it gave you the opportunity to write with a better understanding of drug use and its consequence. And I was just wondering if you would care to elaborate a little bit on that.
Um, no, because it is, I spent 7 years working in a community sort of drug rehab
Yeah.
inspired by Johnny, because at that point I was still quite naive about drugs. And I used to think, why all these, his mother loved him, his sister loved him, Suzanne loved him. He was incredibly gifted. Why could he not stop?
Right.
So I did 7 years at the front line. So maybe that's what I meant about
Yeah. No,
becoming more mature.
definitely. Now, a lot of people who subscribe to the channel were big record collectors, and things, collectors of Johnny and all that stuff. But I'll just say this isn't a question. I just wanted to say this. The book is a blast. It's a great read, but it's a blueprint, I think, for digging out the sequential records that accompany the writing. Okay. So like from the first recording, with Johnny Thunder, the rain zippered apart, you could
Yeah.
break out that Norton record 7-inch. To like Actress, The Birth of New York Dolls, the Mercer Street Sessions, Yonkers demos, which I absolutely love. Like I just had a great time reading the book. And what I did was like I kind of played the records beside them.
That's a
And
lovely idea.
yeah, like with your writing style and playing the records together, it just made like such an enjoyable experience. Like when they're in the basement of that old bicycle shop, you could play those sessions on vinyl, and the way you describe that basement, and then when you can hear it, the sounds coming from that basement, it's actually a really, really cool experience. I would suggest if you do pick up the book, you should in cold blood. Play your
Do you
records
know
with
what I
it.
was do you know what I was going to say to you? You asked me for something that stood out in my mind. And something that really surprised me was when I actually found some local press about what had happened to Billy Mercier, which is incorporated in the book,
Yeah.
who was at that party. But the weirdest thing that happened, and I might have said this before, but not to you, was that the New York Dolls book, Too Much Too Soon, which I think is still in print.
Oh yeah.
Um, After it came out, I got a call in the middle of the night, and I picked it up, and this voice said, "I'm Kim Fowley, and I was at that party, and you didn't mention me." And then he put the phone down.
Wow. No, that's a story right there. That's something else. Oh,
I mean, well, I wish he'd have made his presence known, but I had no idea.
that's what we're worried about too. I mean, good Lord. That's
Yes,
something else, man. I wish you wouldn't have hung up the phone.
I know,
Yeah.
but I was so in shock.
Yeah, that's incredible. Um, so before I wanted to ask you as well, about your future plans, but before we do that, there's something I like to do with all the guests I have in my interviews is we do just a little bit of rapid fire questioning. It doesn't have to be rapid fire. You can take your time and think about it, but they're just kind of silly questions. They're just fun questions, because we talked about a lot of heavy stuff today, I
I think
think,
that's true.
so we should
Yeah,
lighten the mood a little bit. But this book is not doom and gloom. There's a lot of humor in this book, albeit some of it dark humor, but it's an
yeah.
incredible read. Uh,
Johnny was very witty.
sure was very. I think sarcasm was his second language, right? But
Uh,
so we'll do a little rapid fire questioning, just a few, and then we're going to talk about what your future plans are. Um,
okay.
so let's begin with the rapid fire questioning. First one, easy one. What's your favorite Johnny Thunders song?
Oh, memory.
Oh, a
You
classic.
can't put your arms around a memory.
Yeah,
Of course it
absolute
is.
classic. Yeah. If you could see Johnny collaborate with anyone, dead or alive, no pun intended, who would you choose?
Jerry Nolan.
Yeah. And we were talking about gang war before, and very briefly, but I mean, talk about a band that, like, on paper, knocks your socks off, but I don't know what happened there.
Well, I do know what happened. Wayne
Well,
had
we do,
been
yeah, but I
been
mean,
through it and sobered up.
totally. I mean, it should have been something
Oh, it should have
totally,
been.
totally spectacular. Here's a real silly one, and I gotta say, I love your book with Brett about Brett Smiley.
Okay.
Yeah, but I have to ask this question: who would win in an arm wrestling match, Johnny Thunders or Brett Smiley?
Jerry Nolan.
Jerry Nolan is there. What's the best live rock and roll show you've ever seen?
Oh, the Heartbreakers at the Marquee
Yeah,
Club.
excellent. And the last rapid fire question is, and I ask all my guests this, finish this sentence. Rock and roll is
Life.
absolutely true. Now let's talk about a little bit about what you have going on in the future.
Well, it's what I have going on currently. I mean, um I've been recording an album of my poetry, and I don't really, unless it's Johnny, I don't really write so much rock stuff anymore.
Yeah.
But I have been writing for 14 Times, and um I've got a book out next year, and I had a book out called Incurable, and I wrote a novel called Greenwood Fawn. So
Very
I
cool.
have been doing stuff, but it's very different than everything else. But I was very glad that Jawbone reissued In Cold Blood. Was it last year? I think it was.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
there's a lovely introduction by Mike Scott from the Waterboys,
Right.
and Bobby Gillespie and Chrissy Hind have both added quotes to the back, which is really good to see. That's their tribute to Johnny and mine too.
Yeah. It's excellent, man. And so we got a Nina Antonia record that's going to come out. That's going to be awesome.
Yes, I will
Oh,
let you know. I will let you know when the time comes.
yeah, definitely keep us posted. And I would, at some point, I would love to talk to you about the Brett Smiley book if you have the time.
Yes,
Another, like,
well,
very underrated figure of rock and roll, in my opinion. But
we could do that. We could do that when the album comes out.
yeah, that would be awesome. I had a blast talking to you. And I just really want to say much respect. Thank you so much for your time. I mean, I really
Um,
enjoyed. this conversation.
Ryan, I really enjoyed it too. You're a very good interviewer.
Uh, coming from you, that really, honestly, that means a lot. Thank you. And below in the description of this video, I'm going to place a link where you can purchase the revised and updated version of Johnny Thunders In Cold Blood, an absolute terrific read, just an absolute rock and roll roller coaster. It's incredible. If you're a fan of Johnny, you're going to love it. If you've never heard of Johnny, this is where you get into it, man. Nina Antonia, thank you so much for coming on the show.
You're very, very welcome. When we're finished, I'll send you a link to my Twitter page and my website.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
All right, take care. Have a
You
lovely
too.
evening.
You too.
Bye.
Bye bye.